House went ahead and approved an historic tax cut, the likes of which we've not seen in a generation. It's not over. The battle now goes to the Senate, but we're going to be talking to the man who orchestrated all of this very shortly, the House Ways and Means Chief Kevin Brady. Ahead of that, Mike Emanuel on how this all went down in the House today. Michael.
Well, Neil, good afternoon. 227 yes votes on an issue as complicated as tax reform was not easy, but they did get it done. House Speaker Paul Ryan, who has worked his entire career wanting to do tax reform, talked about the road ahead.
We've got a long road ahead of us, and we have a timeline to get this done by the end of the year. We have the Senate right now working on doing this. We're excited about going through the legislative process, going to conference, getting this done, making this bill even better. But most importantly, I am excited on behalf of the American people who are waiting to see us get this done.
President Trump, Vice President Pence, and top administration officials were here on Capitol Hill just ahead of the vote, trying to give House lawmakers a pep talk right before they voted on this critical agenda item. On the other side, the House Democratic leader attacked the GOP pitch.
Republicans want you to believe that their trickle-down tax breaks for the rich will pay for themselves. Never have. They say they're going to create jobs and pay for themselves. Neither is true. They never have.
Work continues on the Senate side of the Capitol as well. In the Finance Committee, the Senate hopes to get its bill across the finish line after the Thanksgiving recess. Neil?
All right, thank you, my friend. Mike Emanuel. Let's go right now to the man who's at all of this, the guy who orchestrated all this long before it was cool to do so, long before we even had a candidate Donald Trump. Of course, I'm talking about the House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady. This is his first chat since that vote, and we're honored to have you, sir. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Neil. Love to start off with you.
I appreciate that. You know, I was noticing the 13 Republican no votes, and not surprisingly, most came from these high-tax states. So even with the $10,000 allowance for mortgage interest that those in those states could write off, they were still no. What would it take to make them yes? Because in the Senate, they won't even have that provision.
Yeah, so we want them to be yes. We want tax relief, even in high-tax states. So we're continuing to work with them. They continue to bring us ideas. So, look, we just want tax relief regardless of where you live. But I think the important thing was 227 votes on a hugely complex and politically tough issue. But look, this is why Republicans came to Congress. And I also tell you what, Speaker Paul Ryan and his leadership, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, and the Ways and Means Committee, they really did an amazing job.
You know, Chairman, were you surprised it was only 13 no votes? I mean, obviously, if you added up all the congressmen from all the high-tax states, you would really get it up to 73. We were told that there could have been up to 30 would be no votes. How did it get down to the 13 who voted no?
Yeah, here's why. Some people are looking at one provision of the tax code and deciding it's not good for them. But if you look at everything we're doing, from standard deductions to lowering the rates to this big new family tax credit to eliminating the AMT and lowering where those bracket points are, a lot of these high tax states look at it and say, wait a minute, this is awfully good for the vast majority of our taxpayers, and they know they're continuing to work with me to see how we can do even better, and I'm pretty confident we can.
Were you getting any sort of direction when the president came up to Capitol Hill today to meet with all of you guys, the House Republicans? Did he tip his hand as to whether he favored your measure, whether he liked a lot of the components within the Senate measure still being marked up? What?
Yeah, the answer is no. He's really encouraging us. He's really proud of the work that's been done. And look, I credit him from the standpoint of we decided, the White House, President Trump, the House Senate tax writers to come together. We spent, I guess, 3 months working toward one tax reform plan. If you look closely, both the House and the Senate are shooting right at that target. There may be some differences in how we do, but I think the president's engagement, he was calling me on the phone at 3 in the morning from Asia during that trip, engaged on tax reform. He just wanted to be here for a pretty historic day.
Were you surprised in the Senate when Ron Johnson out of nowhere, it seemed out of nowhere to me at least, came out as a no vote on this, and not for any of the reasons you would typically expect, but on the treatment of smaller, medium-sized businesses versus larger businesses? They're the ones that benefit, he said, the smaller guys do not. Does that telegraph trouble to you?
No, because one, I believe he's misinformed. In fact, no tax reform has ever put as much toward our small and medium-sized businesses who aren't corporations as we do. That's why the National Federation of Independent Business has embraced this. I've met several times with Senator Johnson on his bill and by phone, I don't know, 2 weeks ago as well. Look, it's got good merits. Everyone should make their case, in this case, in the Senate, and then whether it's adopted or not, to move forward, because I don't know how anyone defends the current tax code, because we're just falling behind the rest of the world.
Do you like the idea that panel is kicking around, Chairman, to get rid of the individual mandate, the requirement that individuals purchase health insurance? It would free up a lot of money, so we know the impetus behind that, but it's already got the likes of Susan Collins, we're told indirectly Bob Corker, concerned, and others saying, you're revisiting that third rail that at least in the Senate they've gotten electrocuted on.
Yeah, so this is one of those issues Senate Finance, as a committee, has decided to put it in. They've still got to work that bill through the floor here in about a week and a half, and so we're going to let them do their work.
Well, do you like the idea, Chairman?
Well, I'll tell you this, in the House, there's an awful lot of support. We've repeatedly repealed the individual mandate, and mainly because, well, for two reasons. One, it is a tax hike on a lot of modest and middle-income families who don't want that health care. They can't afford it. And secondly, our tax code is about the freedom to use your money how you choose. That's about the freedom to buy health care if you want it or not. And so, look, we're going to let the Senate do their work. We're going to prepare. We're pivoting right now toward the work that we're going to need to do with the Senate.
All right. Now, you're far apart on a couple of other issues, too. The number of rates of brackets, they have 7. They also lower that top rate another percent. They also delay the corporate tax cut to the year after next, assuming it's passed this year. How do you feel about both?
Yeah, so a lot of common ground. I think we're going to find more common ground in the conference committee. But look, we want to see growth happen immediately. We want to see those paychecks and those companies competing. So we will push hard for immediate tax cuts, whether you're a family, a Main Street business, or a corporation competing around the world. As for the brackets, look, there are several different ways, to hit this target. We want strong relief at every income level. We do that in the House. But look, we're going to sit down, sort of pick the best of both plans as we work this out.
Do you have any concerns, though, in the meantime, Chairman, that this is going to be a problem because the way it's being sold and the numbers crunched, we hear in excess of 32 million Americans who could pay more taxes. Now, to be fair, a lot of that seems to be based on credits and special allowances that expire in the next few years. How do you fight that? This counter that, wait a minute, this isn't a tax cut for everybody. Millions are going to pay more. What do you say?
Well, what I say is, one, make sure you understand this tax reform bill, because you'll see there's tax relief at every income level and for the vast majority of Americans, and we can make it even better. And that's one of the things I'm excited about doing. It is a challenge in some of the high tax states, but we've already driven tax relief really high into those families.
But is that how they're figuring those who pay higher, sir, real quickly, that it's the expiration of those credits, some of them 5 years out, that if you were to look at it 10 years, that's how they're coming up with that number, that these people pay that?
That is part of it. The other part of it is there's a real debate about what happens when the economy grows, what happens when corporations can compete and win. We believe that accrues to the paychecks and to tax relief. Some don't. And so, look, I think at the end of the day, measure us on the final product. Look, we stripped the tax code down to the bare bones. We're building it up based on what America and our economy needs. And so, look, we judge it at the end because I think you're going to like what you see.
Roy Moore, that election, he's still running in the Senate. But do you think everyone gets this done before the December 12th election to make that a moot point, at least for Republicans, on this tax cut?
Yes, so my focus has always been get at the president's desk by the end of the year. We'll let those other issues we've never gotten distracted, and we're not going to now.
All right. Chairman, thank you very much. Very good seeing you.
Thanks, Neil.
The man who runs the House Ways and Means Committee, of course, a very big victory for him and Republicans in the House. They did approve their measure. Now it's up to the Senate in the middle of marking up its own. Not as easy a fight how they do with theirs. In the meantime, Roy Moore wants to go to the United States Senate with a lot of baggage, we're told, but he says it's not fair and the accusations have not been proven. Then there's Al Franken, Pictures that can tell 1,000 words. He's sorry, and his colleagues are angry. Both after this. All right, a picture worth 1,000 words, and Democratic Senator Al Franken not wasting any time addressing it, accused of kissing and groping a radio anchor without her consent. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell saying that the allegations could trigger an ethics review, one that Senator Franken said that he would welcome. Fox Business Network's Connell McShane has more on all of this. Wow, it's incredible stuff. What do you have, Connell?
Well, indeed, Neil. Now, the calls for an ethics investigation actually have come today from both sides of the aisle. We've seen Democrats joining in with Republicans on that. And the backstory on all of this is Senator Franken's accused of groping and forcibly kissing a woman by the name of Leanne Tweeden. She's a radio news anchor these days. This was back in 2006. She showed this picture with his hands on Tweeden's breasts while she was sleeping. It was said to be taken on a plane. This is the two of them were flying home from a USO tour in which they were performing. Now, on that tour, Franken, then working as a comedian, wrote a skit and had called for him to kiss Tweeden. She says he repeatedly asked her backstage to practice that kiss, and she says she didn't think that was necessary, but he insisted. She writes about the experience, saying he came at me, put his hands on the back of my head, mashed his lips against mine, and aggressively stuck his tongue in my mouth. Franken says he remembers that rehearsal differently, but he did apologize in a statement saying this about the picture. I don't know what was in my head when I took that picture, and it doesn't matter. There's no excuse. I look at it now and I feel disgusted with myself. It isn't funny. It's completely inappropriate. Now, in Los Angeles this afternoon, Tweeden took questions from reporters. She actually says she accepts Franken's apology and was not necessarily calling for him to step down. As for why she's telling her story,
about all the women who don't have microphones and have a voice and can say something and then it's everywhere on the news. You know, what about the women who get assaulted every day and are afraid to speak out? I mean, look, I was afraid to speak out 11 years ago. I had a good career and I thought, you know what, if I come out and speak out then, I probably would get fired or would just get phased out. And I was afraid of that. You know, and I'm not afraid of that anymore. I mean, could it still happen? Sure, possibly, but you know, I'm a lot more secure.
She also says, Neil, she's hopeful she can maybe inspire more women to speak out, but to do so in real time.
All right, Connell, thank you very much. Meanwhile, Roy Moore, as you probably heard earlier on this network, is staying in the race. He's not going anywhere. In fact, he has just followed up with a tweet of his own to say, I'm going to tell you who needs to step down. That's Mitch McConnell. Of course, they've had a back and forth. So you can imagine if he does, in fact, make it to the U.S. Senate, how that relationship's going to go. Let's go to Larry Sabato, the UVA Center for Politics, multiple best-selling author. Good to have you, Professor. What do you make of this? I mean, that's a seat that could very likely go Democrat the way things are going now. We don't know, but he's not going anywhere. What do you think?
Yeah, the news is getting X-rated again, Neil, you know, between Moore and Franken and probably others as things develop. Look, on the Alabama Senate seat, the election's December 12th, and every day is a dog year now in politics, and so lots of things will happen between now and December 12th. But clearly, this ought to be a slam dunk for any Republican in Alabama. It's not. I don't know what the final numbers will turn out to be, but this is more competitive than an Alabama race should be. So is there any way to get more off the ballot? No, apparently there is no way to do it.
In fact, the more they do it, or the more they try it, right? I mean, it looks like they're trying to take this out of the hands of the Alabama voters. So maybe they'll just have to roll the dice on this, see how it goes, and you know, hope springs eternal for them, I'm sure. The Democratic candidate very, very much concerned about any interference here. Ultimately, what do you think happens?
Well, you always give the edge to any Republican in Alabama. The Democrat is really in the race because of all the problems attending to Roy Moore.
Right.
And so this is one where I don't think you want to call it until you get right to Election Day, and we'll see what develops one way or the other. There are loads of theories out there.
Voters, though? I'm sorry. Would it tick off Alabama voters to say, all right, we might have, you know, Senator Strange, you know, step down, force an election? Clearly, the intent is to do anything and everything to find a new election that could favor the Republican. I can't blame them for that, but ultimately, it looks bad, doesn't it? I mean, to force an issue here and change election timetables, candidates, et cetera.
Yeah, Alabama voters have made it pretty clear that they're not very pro-establishment. And so, the governor it's been proposed to the governor that she delay the election. She has said no. It's been proposed that Senator Strange, the interim incumbent, resign, triggering a new special election or potentially a delayed special election. That's not going to happen. So a lot of these things just won't work. And in the end, probably it's going to come down to Moore and Jones right on the ballot as we see it today.
Professor, thank you very, very much. And by the way, if you thought any of this was wearing Wall Street today, guess what? It wasn't. We'll have more to this.
They got a call and said, asked me to step down from the campaign. Well, I want to tell you who needs to step down. That's right. Come on. That's Mitch McConnell.
All right, I don't think Roy Moore is going anywhere. Missouri Republican Senator Roger Wicker on all of this. Senator, very good to have you. It seems to be getting out of control now, right? What do you make of all this back and forth? I mean, let's say he became senator with all of this happening. What will his reception be like in the United States Senate?
Well, my goodness, I tell you what, I'm going to let the people of Alabama decide that issue, and I'm going to work hard to get taxes cut for job creators and job growth and take-home pay. And I'll just take the quaint position that the people in Alabama will make the decision about who their next United States Senator will be.
All right. And in Mississippi, I'm sorry to state at the outset there, sir. Of course I know, right? But it's been a long day. But do you feel right now that it could be a problem if he does come, that the tension between he and the Senate leader, and then maybe this is something that goes beyond this, it shows the dangers of what could happen now if Steve Bannon succeeds in getting more such candidates, who are primarying established candidates, and that this could get to be more common. Not these kind of allegations, of course, but the kind of fighting back and forth. What do you think?
Well, you had a pretty good political analyst on just before me, Dr. Larry Sabato of the University of Virginia, and I think he made a lot of good points. A lot of these little nuances and innovative ideas about trying to change the rules here with 3.5 weeks to go, they're not going to take place, and basically this is going to turn out to be an election between the Democrat and Republican nominees in Alabama. And I made a statement to my local Mississippi press last week, and I just feel real comfortable sticking with that. I don't know the players. I've only met Judge Moore one time, and I'm pretty comfortable really tossing that decision to them and not anticipating what might happen after the election.
Senator, what did you think of the Al Franken thing? Both sides, both Senate leaders, Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Senator Franken himself.
Well, I tell you, I've been so excited today about the great news from the House of Representatives with the passage of the tax bill and the soon-to-be passage from the Senate Finance Committee of a similarly good bill. I haven't really had much time to actually even read or listen to reports about Senator Franken. I understand that he acknowledged the photograph and said that it made him uncomfortable and he was embarrassed about it, and he was going to concede to an ethics investigation. So beyond that, I've been looking in other directions today and haven't really focused on that.
All right, let's talk about that tax thing, because now it's going to go to the Senate, and when I was hearing this yesterday, this time with Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, was saying I can't vote for it right now. Are you worried that this thing could be like the health care rework last go round, and this could explode in the Senate's face?
Well, I sure hope not. And there's a very narrow 52 to 48 margin in the United States Senate, and so when you lose one vote, it does give you pause for sure. I would hope this: the Senate Finance Committee proposal is going to be out there. It will be subject to amendment on the floor under the rules that we have in the Senate, unlimited amendment. The vote-a-rama will take place on into the night. And Senator Johnson will have an opportunity to make his case, but also then they'll go to a conference committee. And I dare say that at the end of the day, Senator Johnson might not get exactly the bill that he would have written in a vacuum. And I won't get the bill that I would have written had I had.
But
had
you think
to
he
do it
could
all
be?
by myself.
You think he could be?
But I
a
think
yes
he can be
vote?
brought around to a yes, because this bill is a job creator for Americans. It takes us from being totally uncompetitive with our trading partners in Asia and Europe, and brings that corporate rate, that rate on job creation, down from 35% to 20%.
Well, you hope,
puts
though,
us
right,
in line with Asia and Europe.
Senator, let me ask that, because what if the companies that get this big break don't expand plant and don't hire more people? They just pour it back into their stocks or increase their dividends. It's their money; they can do what they want, of course. But would you be disappointed? Would you say we really did all this, and you guys are killing us?
Well, that's a hypothetical question that I don't think will take place.
It's happened before, as you know,
actually,
right?
every time we've had major tax reform and cut the rates on job creators, we've had an expansion. And you know, when Ronald Reagan, in his first year of office, when we cut taxes, we had a GDP growth of over 4%. Similar good results when President Kennedy persuaded a bipartisan Congress to cut taxes.
All right.
So I think the incentives will be there, and I think the result will be not only a nice tax cut for almost everyone, the vast majority
and they hire
of people in the
people.
middle class,
People, right?
but better wages and higher take-home pay.
We shall see. Sir, thank you for taking the time. Well, much more. Mark Cuban, a big critic of this. Why?
Competition drives what I do in my business is a whole lot more than tax rates. You know, worrying about what Amazon is going to impact a whole lot more companies and futures, as will Microsoft and Facebook and Google and other big companies, a lot more than the marginal tax rate. So they're shuffling, in a lot of respects, they're shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic.
All right, now that's Mark Cuban's opinion of this tax cut. It is a substantial tax cut, taking it down from 35 to 20%. So many disagree, including Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, who was just with us. I want to raise this with former Hostess CEO Greg Rayburn. My point on this is that it can't help but not have a beneficial effect. I see that, Greg. But the one thing I also see is a sort of concern among many that companies will take this money and not invest in plant and equipment. They'll plow it back into their stock buybacks, raise their dividend, and eventually they might do some of this stuff, but maybe not to the degree, to Mark Cuban's point, that people want to see. What do you think?
I don't buy that. You know, I think that every good CEO out there spends a large part of their time continually thinking about how to invest their cash to grow the business. It's just about growing that business. And the tax reform bill is about jobs. At the end of the day, that's really what that stimulus is intended for. If I'm a CEO and I'm sitting there and I'm saying, look, I've got $10 million extra to spend either because a product outperformed my expectations or because I got a corporate tax rate cut. Either way, the things that I need to do with that money, the things I'm going to look to do would be product improvement, product line expansion, territory expansion. All of those things are job creators.
But
now,
you can
mentioned
buy a lot of companies, right? That wouldn't necessarily create jobs, right? So I'm just giving you the cynical view on that. But that one is that people.
That's fine.
Remember last time when George Bush, the last President Bush, had this brief tax holiday, the companies did use that money, bought up their stock and did that. And what's to stop that from happening again? Again, companies are free to do that. But again, this is working on the idea that they're not going to do that again. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, look, let's go back to acquisitions because you mentioned that. I mean, that's clearly another use of those funds. And that may, in the short term, reduce jobs, but in the long run, it will add more jobs than otherwise would have been created because you're putting that capital into a growth vehicle. Look, if, you know, CEOs can't just sit around and say, gee, let me just buy back stock. The gutter is littered with companies that have spent too much buying back their own stock and inflating prices like IBM. And outside of a relative few high-growth tech companies that even Cuban mentioned, that has been a bad strategy historically. I'm not saying they couldn't make a bad decision and do that,
right.
But the better ways to grow your business are to put the money in the business.
Now, what did you think of Ron Johnson of Wisconsin saying the big boys, they're benefiting from this, the big companies, not the small and medium companies. I don't want any part of that, so I'm not voting for it.
I don't see how you make that delineation. I mean, I'm a small business owner, but I've run companies of all different sizes. The calculus and the time you spend and the decision-making process is the same, whether you are, a $3 or $4 billion revenue company, or whether you're a $100 million revenue company. And the other thing about stock buybacks that I want to get out there is that in most cases, that means that management team has run out of good ideas for uses of the capital in the business. And I think that's a generally held belief. So, you can throw those things out as things that could happen, but that would be in the minority of the 8 or 9 things that I could think of out of 10 that you would be putting that money to work for.
It has happened, though, so you hope that, maybe not to this degree, given the stark difference in rates we're talking about, but we'll see. Thank you.
Well, tax bills don't delete stupidity.
I like that. I'll write that one down. Greg Rayburn, thank you very, very much. Good seeing you.
Good to see you, Neil.
All right, this kind of puts all of this tax talk thing aside. A very busy holiday season coming up, and word right now that ISIS is targeting, again, and this time, the Vatican. We'll explain. All right, the State Department apparently is re-upping this European travel alert for all Americans through the holiday season, citing the terrorist attacks that occurred over last year's holiday season, particularly, you might recall, in Berlin. That was then what could happen now amid heightened calls for ISIS activity as well on the part of ISIS itself, now threatening Rome, the Vatican, more to the point, and the Pope himself, former New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, with all of that. Commissioner, very good to have you.
Good to be with you, Neil.
I guess this is obvious. You would just keep the alert status relatively high for Americans traveling anywhere, particularly to Europe. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly. And, when you have major events like we have the Thanksgiving Day Parade coming up here, there's always a possibility of an attack, certainly in a post-9/11 world. I think the NYPD does a terrific job in protecting major events like that. I can understand some apprehension about Europe. We've seen a series of attacks there. We saw Barcelona. We saw Nice last year. We saw Germany around Christmas time. So we have to be on guard. People have to be alert. But, it wouldn't deter me, put it that way.
When we had the attack a few weeks ago downtown on those bicycle paths, and a lot of people were talking to me, Neil, I don't want to come in to New York for the holidays. I'm just, after Las Vegas, after this, I'm just staying home. What do you tell people?
Well, I think there's a risk in going out your front door every day. Nobody has more resources, nobody has more focus on protecting the city than the NYPD these days. The Homeland Security has been very helpful in giving the department resources. I think they do an excellent job. There are no guarantees. This individual who committed this attack on Halloween, he had no footprint. It just underscores the difficulty in identifying these people. He wasn't on the internet. He wasn't communicating.
And he came here under this program where he was fine at the time, but got radicalized later. And that's something we had apparently little control over.
That's right. And he did it on the internet. It was a classic case. He came through this visa lottery program, which obviously is questionable. But he's here. All indications are he radicalized within the last year and a half. He listened to al-Baghdadi's speeches. He had it on his cell phone. And he did it, from all we can see, by himself. And that's what's particularly disturbing, because there's no trail here. There's no footprint, as I said.
Now,
he followed a playbook. He followed the ISIS and al-Qaeda playbook almost to a T.
Now, we don't know the source of a lot of this intelligence chatter otherwise that leads us to believe ISIS might be targeting the Vatican, what have you. It would not be the first time that terror groups have wanted to do that or targeted Rome in general. How do they respond to that there? I mean, people hear that, and then in the case of the Vatican, or what, how do they handle that?
They have pretty good security at the Vatican. As you said, there have been many, many threats against the Vatican. The Italian police, the police in Rome, certainly are aware of the threat and have a lot of resources, a lot of police officers in that area. I was there just this summer, and I was impressed with what they have there. But again, there are no guarantees.
It could happen anywhere.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Do you worry, though, that now a lot of people, when you look at the foreign press about us, Commissioner, they say, well, they had that Los Angeles, and they had this incident in downtown, they had the Texas shooting. They seem to have major shootings, one every month. What do you say to that? What is the problem? The common theme seems, it's guns. It's American obsession with guns. What do you say?
I think guns certainly are a very big issue. We have over 300 million guns in this country. We haven't really seen a common thread. Well, I would say this. Most of the shootings, the multiple shootings, have some domestic issue related. About 52% of them have some kind of family issues. But then there's the others out there that are very, very difficult to identify to why it was done. Just this individual in California.
Right.
And then law enforcement is trying to drill down and get some reason for these things.
Because it happens at places where there are very tough gun laws too, or in the case of some of the recent shooters getting declined for a permit and yet still finding a gun. And I'm just wondering how that happens. What slips up, or communication between various security agencies, how that slips up?
The reality is that you can get a rifle pretty easily. A lot of the gun laws are focused on handguns. But for hunting purposes, you can get a rifle. It's questionable as to whether or not you should be able to get an assault rifle, but that's out there now. That's the way the law is.
And that's your point on this. So the guns are fine, but there's a limit and how the sophistication of some of them for average use, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But when you have a weapon that'll take 30 rounds, and these shooters will have 5 or 10 clips with them, they can put out 150 rounds in a minute and a half. That's the capability. That's the capacity that shooters have these days. So that's an issue that has to be looked at. I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. That's just the posture of Congress these days. So I wish there was an easier answer to multiple shootings. We average about 1 every 2 weeks in this country. We just, see them rolling out. It seems like even more than that. But there's no easy answer as long as you have 300 million guns abroad in this country.
I think someone was saying right after the New York attack, and it was before the Texas shooting, we simply have more disturbed individuals right now. We don't have state mental hospitals like we used to. We don't have nearly the number of mental clinics that we used to.
Oh, yeah.
And as a result, many more of these people who used to be locked up or at least hospitalized are not.
Yeah, you see the movement towards deinstitutionalization actually in the 70s. And now you have people who everything is handled through medication. Oh, and by the way, they don't take their medication. And that's where a problem arises. We see it on the streets of this city all the time.
Yeah. Commissioner, very good seeing you.
Good to be with you, Neil.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll have a lot more into this, including a detailed rundown on what happened with the markets and why, through all of these worries, all of these concerns, all of this frightening stuff going on, good and bad, they're still buying. After this. All right, well, the Alabama Republican Party just saying that it stands by its Senate candidate Roy Moore, breaking with national Republicans who want him to step down. Let's go to senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram. So we got a little bit of a, sort of a rift growing there with those in the party in the state of Alabama saying, we'll handle this on our own, thank you, right?
Yeah, well, it's good to run against Washington, and this is consistent with Roy Moore and those who support him, that they are against Mitch McConnell. He sent out tweets today saying it ought to be Mitch McConnell who steps down. He's also raised hackles with Mitch McConnell, saying, well, maybe, he's weighing in on Bob Menendez and Al Franken. Why is he weighing in on me? So there is definitely a schism here between the Alabama Republicans and the national Republicans in Washington.
How do you think this is going to sort out with the tax cut battle? I know a number of senators told me, well, we're moving full steam ahead. You had the vote in the House today. Presumably they want to get a vote done before December 12th, the special election date. But what do you think?
Yeah, that's part of the race. They would like to get this done, but it's hard to believe that they could get a Senate bill through and then have it merged, conferenced with the House version. You know, that might take some time. There have been a lot of experts off Capitol Hill, sources who I've spoken with, and they think they can maybe get this done, but they say get it done by Christmas, which is what House Speaker Paul Ryan keeps saying. That's a little bit of a far stretch. So getting it done by that date, the 12th, is hard. And also, you know, you don't know if there could be recounts, if it's close, canvassing. You know, we were told that it might take up until the 22nd of December to actually get a result from Alabama before it's fully certified. So it's not like you just show up on the 13th necessarily.
Yeah, let's sort of take that race out of the equation for the time being and talk about the number of senators we have who could bolt on the Republican side on this thing. We've already got, you know, Ron Johnson, and there's some trepidation we hear coming from Susan Collins in Maine about inserting this individual mandate provision and revisiting that. What's your sense of how things are looking there?
Well, it's going to be tight no matter what. It's going to be within that turning radius of 2 or 3 votes. They're at 52 votes now. Let's say Doug Jones wins. It could be down to 51. John McCain, who a lot of people blame for blowing up health care, he was asked earlier today what he thought, and he said, well, we don't have the bill yet. It's not in the Finance Committee, so you don't know where he stands.
John McCain's interesting, too, because he has been concerned in the past about, you know, adding things in. If they did that individual mandate thing, and given his beef with the way the health care thing was handled, what then?
Right. And Lisa Murkowski from Alaska would be one, and so would be Susan Collins.
What a mess. All right. Thank you very much, my friend. Chet Program. Bottom line, we'll get a gauge of this and how the markets are going to respond to this. They like what they see thus far, and they're optimistic that all this back and forth notwithstanding, they are going to get their tax cuts. And when they do, or so they say. That'll do it.